Heyo, today I'm going to teach you how to make money from buy-to-let, which is a strategy of renting to tenants. I'm going to set out the step-by-step process to calculate how much is put into the deal, how much is taken out of the deal, and how much profit is generated on a monthly basis. If you stay to the end of the video, I'll show you how a small increase in the property market or appreciation in the market can impact these values massively and can create huge profits over the long and short term. So let's get into the video. Firstly, the property. For buy-to-let, you can buy two different kinds of properties mainly. You can buy a modern property that doesn't need any refurbishment or any work done to it. This has the advantage of being ready to rent, although it has the downside that you have to put quite a good proportion of your money into that deal and you can't take any of it out via refinancing, you just benefit from the monthly cash flow. You could also buy a property that's in need of refurbishment. This is what I call buying the gap. If you buy a property in need of refurbishment, you don't have to put as much into the initial purchase, but you do have to do some work to refurbish the property to make it into a good standard. However, this work will cost say £10,000 to £15,000, but will generate up to £50,000, £60,000, £70,000 of value gained. Therefore, when you refinance, you can take out most of this money, up to say 80% on a buy-to-let mortgage, which will repay almost all of the amount that you put in, or more than you put in some circumstances. After refurbishment, these kind of properties will rent for just as much as a modern brand new property will. It might not rent for the exact same amount because a brand new property will benefit from certain discounts and allowances only available to properties that are brand new and have been recently built. However, a property that has been refurbished has already been around for a long time, and these properties don't fall foul of snagging issues that brand new properties typically suffer. A buy-to-let mortgage typically requires a 20 to 25% deposit. If you're also buying a property using bridging finance, this will also require a 20 to 25% deposit that you could refinance onto a buy-to-let product. However, if you employ more of a house hacking strategy, which is where you buy the property as a personal property, you only need a 10% deposit. You could then let out rooms to tenants, or after some time of living in the property as your own, could refinance onto a buy-to-let property. Using a similar example to the prior video, this property was in need of refurbishment, and if you were to employ a house hacking strategy, you would only need a 10% deposit mortgage, which on a property worth £185,000 is going to be about £18,500. Secondly is the fees involved. The legal fees on purchase are going to be quite similar to purchasing a property to flip. You're still going to need the same solicitors or the same conveyancers to do the same kind of work, and therefore the fees are likely to be around £1,450. You're also going to need buildings insurance, which is going to be a similar amount, although it might be more and slightly more expensive because you'll also need a form of business insurance, as you're not only protecting yourself, but also protecting your tenants. The loan fees are going to be slightly more expensive. For a buy-to-let mortgage, these are more difficult to set up, and the banks and lenders typically take a higher fee for setting these up. For a residential mortgage, fees are between £0 and £1,000, and these are often a fixed fee. For a buy-to-let mortgage, they often work on a percentage basis, and it's usually around 1 to 2% of the total loan fee. So let's say around £3,650 or £3,700 for example. The refurb costs are also going to be largely similar, although you could probably reduce the refurb costs slightly than our prior example because you're not going to be selling the property and trying to get as much money as possible for the property. You're only going to be renting out to a tenant. Obviously, you don't want to make the property rubbish because a tenant won't really want to rent it then, but you could put say £8,000 to £10,000 into the property to make it look really nice. You could make some cost savings such as using a slightly cheaper carpet or a laminate worktop instead of a nice expensive quartz or granite worktop, for example. You could also use a slightly cheaper tiling method to what I recommended in my previous video. Instead of using a floor to ceiling tiling method, you could kind of half tile the bathroom and only tile the areas that are likely to get wet, such as the shower or the sink splashback. You also don't have to factor in some of the other costs from the example in the previous video, because these will be covered by the tenant as part of the rental agreement. You don't have to factor in costs such as council tax, water or other utilities, because obviously these are covered. Therefore, this likely brings your total cost to around £199,000 instead of over £200,000 like you were with the flipping strategy. With a cheaper total price, this means you actually need less money to put into the deal, and when you refinance, you're probably quite likely to get the majority of your money back out that you put in. Next up is the refinance. In the example from the previous video, our sale price was around £235,000. Obviously we said that if we refurbished it to a very high quality, you might be likely to get slightly more than that £235,000. However, in this instance, because the properties are going to be revalued by the bank, who are going to want to cover their losses as such, they're probably going to revalue it for a slightly lower value than it's potentially worth, just to almost create themselves a sort of insulation bubble to make sure that if you can't pay the mortgage and they need to sell the property, at least they'll be fairly certain that they can sell it and get all of the money back that they lent to you. In terms of actually comparing how much we could get out via refinance, comparing a modern property to a property that we've refurbished, let's take a slightly lower refinance price, because obviously the bank's going to want to insulate themselves, and say instead of 235,000, we take 220,000. Obviously this is quite a big gap, but yeah, let's say 220,000. If you were to refinance using an 80% buy-to-let product, you'd get 176,000 back out that you'd use to repay your mortgage that you used to buy the property in the first place. On a property that was bought for £185,000 using a 10% mortgage, you'd have a loan of around 165, just over 167,500 or something like that, pound loan against it. Obviously you could only do this if you've been using the house hacking strategy for a while beforehand. When you refinance and get out your 176,000, this then repays that £167,500 loan and leaves you about £10,000. This £10,000 obviously goes towards paying off what you've put into the deal. Obviously you've put in around about £20,000 initially as your 10% deposit, and then spent around another 15,000. So altogether you're at about 35,000. You've now got an extra £10,000 back out, so you're about 25k left in the deal. But this is quite a bit better than buying a modern, ready-to-rock property. Let's say obviously you paid the full £235,000 for the property. If you're putting in a 20% deposit, this leaves you with about 51,000 left in the deal, which is obviously a lot more than 25,000 from our previous example. In addition, to be able to buy a brand new property, a new build, you're looking at probably at least a 20% increase on that 235,000, because new build properties always go for a premium compared to existing properties that have been refurbished. If you've enjoyed the video so far, leave a comment below about what topics you'd like me to go in depth in the future. Alternatively, if you have a question that you just need answered, drop it down in the comments below and I'll make sure to respond. Next up is the rent. In the UK, buy-to-let mortgage products are stress tested instead of using an affordability criteria or a salary multiplier. In the UK, banks stress test these buy-to-let mortgage at 5.5% interest and 125% to 145% of the rental income. What this means is, let's say you take a purchase price of £220,000. You then times this by 5.5% and then times that amount by 1.25 or 1.45, and then that gets you the amount that the property will need to rent for each year for the lender to be able to give you that mortgage. In this example, our property would need to rent for at least £1,000 a month to be eligible for a mortgage. Let's say you got that £1,000 a month in rent. What costs are you likely going to have to pay out of this £1,000 a month? Well, it does depend if you've agreed whether the tenant or yourself is going to pay the council tax and the utilities. If they're not going to pay, council tax is usually £150 a month, and utilities, let's say, are also £150 a month. It's also worth including management costs in here, unless you plan to self-manage the property. A property manager will usually charge around 10% of the rent, which is £100 in this instance. You also have to pay the mortgage costs on the interest-only mortgage. These costs are likely to be £365 a month on an interest-only product at 80%. Obviously, if you're using a lower LTV product, the interest costs are going to be much cheaper. It's also worth factoring in vacancy costs and repair costs. Let's set aside another 10 to 20% a month to factor these in as well. Therefore, in total, after all the expenses have come out, you're earning £170 a month or £2,040 a year for doing nothing other than managing the property and letting your investment grow. Let's assume you're using a house hacking or lodger strategy. The rent on this is likely to be a bit cheaper because they're not getting the whole house to themselves, they're probably only renting a bedroom. In the UK, especially in the southeast, typical rent for a bedroom or for a small property is around £700 a month. So let's say you're getting £700 a month in rental income. Your total bills, including a mortgage with interest and repayment, and all the bills mentioned earlier, is going to be around £950. But this means, because you're letting someone else live in the property with you, you're only paying £250 a month to own a house all on your own. This works out to be paying £3,000 a year to own your own property. But what happens if the property market increases? Let's factor in a 1% increase in the market and see what that does to our annual income. If you're renting a property to a tenant, this works out around £4,500 income a year. And if you're using a lodger, this means you're only paying £650 for the full year for the benefit of owning your own property and capitalising on any future increases in the property market. If we instead assume a 3% increase in the market, which has been the average increase yearly over the past 20 or 30 years, we would see that if you're using a buy-to-let strategy, you're going to be earning £9,000 a year. And if you're renting to a lodger, you'll still be earning £4,000 a year for the benefit of owning your own property. You're actually receiving money to own a property. Considering we only have around 25k left in the deal, this 9k as a return on investment is around 40% return on investment. And if you're using a lodger, the 4k, it's around an 18% return on investment. If you want to learn how to calculate ROI or any other calculations, then subscribe to my channel and ding the notification button, because I'll be putting out videos in the future that go in depth showing you how to do these calculations. Cheers.